Hello, Internet, and welcome to this week's edition of 1 Minute Answers from 1 Minute Economics, an edition dedicated to isolationism. And as always, before moving on to the questions you guys have asked me, I want to pick the topic for next week, and the topic for next week is going to be the United Kingdom. Now, as we all know, snap elections have taken place in the United Kingdom, and the results put the UK in a bit of a complex situation in that the Conservatives led by Theresa May have indeed won, but the results have not been as good as expected, and it remains to be seen how this will affect the United Kingdom and, of course, the Brexit negotiations. So, if you have a question about the UK in general, about the economy of the United Kingdom, about the Brexit negotiations, or anything along those lines, simply ask me by writing a comment below, and I'm going to do my best to answer next week. The first question for today has been asked by Bill, who would like to know if isolationism can make the life of that particular country's citizens better. And my answer is going to be yes, it can, but it probably won't. And what I'm trying to say is that in an ideal scenario in which only one country embarks on an isolationist journey and the other countries don't do anything at all to retaliate, then sure, that country is obviously going to have a competitive edge. So basically, if country A starts making it harder for other countries to sell their products in that particular country, if country A imposes all sorts of protectionist restrictions and nobody else does anything about it, then sure, country A is going to have a competitive advantage compared to everyone else for sure. But realistically speaking, that's not going to happen. So for example, if the United States feels that more cars should be produced in the US and imposes all sorts of tariffs to ensure that it happens, then of course Germany could say, wait, we want the same things. We want more cars to be produced in Germany, we want more electronics to be produced in Germany, and so on. And therefore, the likelihood of other countries following in the footsteps of country A is remarkably high. And history tends to prove, and there are more than enough examples to illustrate this, history tends to prove that isolationism is ultimately a bad idea for everyone involved, in that a vicious circle starts to be generated in which country A imposes isolationist measures, then countries B, C, and D do the same to retaliate, then perhaps country A takes things one step further, and things continue in this manner until, well, a lot of cases, until a war takes place, for example. So personally, I tend to be pretty frightened when I see signs of isolationism because I know that, historically speaking, even if initially there can be advantages for one country or another, in the mid to long run, I firmly believe that isolationism leads to political, economic, and ultimately humanitarian disaster. Today's second and final question takes things one step further and refers to a specific country, to the United States. And I'm asked if I think that Trump's isolationism will make the lives of US citizens better or not. So I'm basically asked what the effects are going to be when it comes to the citizens of the United States. And this tends to bring me to what I've said before. If nobody else retaliates, then sure, United States citizens are going to be better off, jobs are going to be brought in the United States, and so on. But the likelihood of that happening is extremely slim because, as we can notice, other countries don't just stand by idly whenever the US does something. Like, for example, when other NATO members have noticed that Trump is less enthusiastic about NATO than they hoped he would be, then all of a sudden things start moving towards the direction of, for example, Europe having its own army. And the same way, it's fairly safe to assume that other countries are going to retaliate if the United States imposes all sorts of protectionist measures. So, in the short run, Perhaps it's possible that US citizens are going to see some positive effects, but the main risk I, for one, envision in the mid to long term is the fact that the United States might end up isolated. It all depends on what everyone else is going to do. So, for example, China might decide to emerge as a worldwide leader and assume the role that the United States has played up until this point. That's one possible scenario. Other possible scenarios might include even more drastic things, like certain countries punishing the US in one way or another. And that's what I'm trying to say. The temptation of isolationism is obvious because you have a candidate who comes during the campaign and says, it's time to put America first. It's time to bring back jobs to the US. The problem is that things tend to be more complicated than that. And let me ask you, what happens if Germany puts Germany first, if Japan puts Japan first, if China puts China first, and so on? In theory, putting America first sounds great, but again, based on what history has taught us, I, for one, am pretty terrified of the fact that the mid to long-term effects can be much more devastating than people have anticipated. That's it for today, guys. Thanks a lot for tuning in to yet another edition of 1 Minute Answers from 1 Minute Economics. And remember, the topic for next week is the United Kingdom. So if you have questions ranging from, I don't know, the Brexit to the economy of the UK or anything else related to the United Kingdom, simply ask by writing a comment below and I'm going to do my best to answer next week. And as usual, please like my videos, share them with others, comment, be active in the community, and subscribe to 1 Minute Economics if you haven't by now. Also, to support the channel financially as well by buying my book, by donating through PayPal, Bitcoin, Patreon, and so on, please head on over to 1minuteeconomics.com where you can find more info on how to do that. Thanks a lot, guys, and have an awesome weekend.